We live in a world that is largely shaped and defined by cars. Cars influence the way cities evolve, and they have a huge impact on the way we experience our urban environment. In Winnipeg, which has a population of around 700,000, there are almost 350,000 passenger vehicles registered. That's almost one car for every 2 inhabitants. My name is Janine Tschuncky, and I've lived in Winnipeg for 35 years without ever driving a car. In fact, I made a conscious choice many years ago not to drive, and this has affected the way I experience my city. Recently, I've been meeting more and more people who are also choosing not to drive, and that's made me curious about how not driving shapes our lives.
My name is Tim Brandt, and I don't drive because I really hate cars. So now I'm going to contradict myself and say, even though I hate cars, I did like them, and I used to love driving. I drove taxi in the city of Winnipeg for years and years, and it was crazy. I mean, I just thought I could go as fast as I wanted, and I had to sometimes to get people to where they wanted to go. So I got a lot of speeding tickets. Everyone else in my family drives pretty regularly, and I suppose they all think I'm kind of odd because I don't anymore.
My name is France Legault, and I choose not to drive because I was raised that way. Well, I grew up in Montreal, and in our neighborhood, I grew up where my mom went to school, in that same school I went to school, and the neighbors across the street were my aunts and uncles and grandma, and it was family oriented. Not that many people had cars because there was no need for cars. People who were living in the suburb had cars, but not us.
Now, the dream cars of tomorrow.
Oldsmobile's elegant golden rocket.
Everything was conveniently close. We walked to the grocery store, we walked to La Rue Saint-Hubert for shopping, and we were even going there for Sunday walks. It was an enjoyable thing to do.
At first, finding alternatives to driving may seem like a personal choice, but it's an issue that we need to discuss as a city.
I'm Ted McLaughlin. I'm a landscape architect, photographer, printmaker. I teach in the Graduate Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Manitoba. We came about because of the rivers. And Winnipeg is really unique that way in the Canadian context. And if you look at how Pembina Highway wiggles along and Portage Avenue, St. Mary's, Henderson, Main Street, those are all the trails that were just back of the river and then gave access. The 60s came and went, and we talked a lot about freeways, and city councils expropriated major portions of land to make these connected freeways. We just never built them. That's just sort of the story of Winnipeg, which is a great part of Winnipeg. We're probably now at maximum capacity on many of the streets, and that's where we're starting to see bottlenecks and that occurring. But we still can manage that if we move to more mass transit, rapid transit, to supplement the number of cars and those peak flows.
My family didn't have a car until we came to Canada, and as a child I learned to value walking. Some of my early experiences of being in a car were traumatic, especially when my dad was teaching my mom how to drive. But not everyone who chooses not to drive has had a bad experience. Some have had almost no experience of being in cars, while others have had positive experiences.
My name is Vita Concan, and I don't drive because it adds to my well-being. When I was a kid, we didn't have a car at all, so I got really used to walking to and from places I had to go, even swimming lessons and school. We always walked, and it was a pretty long walk to and from school. It was about 40 minutes, so I got really used to walking where I had to go. I did get to ride in cars like occasionally. My grandparents had a car, my papa had a car, but that was like this really exciting treat to get to go in his SUV to where we were going. But it wasn't something I was accustomed to, and it wasn't a part of my day-to-day life. We walked almost everywhere and occasionally took the bus, so I'm sure that influenced my comfort level with cars and that I prefer to walk.
My name is Chandra Mayer, and I don't drive because I don't want to. I spent a lot of time in the car as a kid and never had any particularly negative experiences, but I was never interested in the car. You know, all of my time in the car as a child, I spent reading, and I really liked it. You know, in those long family camping trips, so much beautiful reading time. And so I was never looking around. I was really never aware of the car. I have very little sense of what road signs mean or no intuitive sense of how traffic works and flows, no intuitive sense of how cars work, because I was never paying attention. I just never cared. I was always reading.
My name is Julia Michaud, and I choose not to drive because I am absolutely terrible at it. My early child experiences were pretty much driving with the family on the holiday in the station wagon with my dad white-knuckle driving through the mountains of BC, and my mother hanging her head out the window looking over the cliff, and the kids in the back seat just terrified like that and thinking, this is it. We're all going over the edge. So that's pretty much what I remember from driving in the car with the parents. Fear.
My name is Howard Curl, and I don't drive because at this stage of my life, I choose not to. I don't need the agita. When I was small, I suffered from car sickness. I realized that I got into this feeling because of the way my father drove his car. He used to pump the brakes. And he had a few other habits like keeping gasoline in a canister in the back of the station wagon too. The fumes used to bother me tremendously.
My name is Francine Martin, and I choose not to drive because it's never felt necessary. My mother had attempted to learn how to drive, but had an unfortunate accident and ran a cat over, at which time she swore that she would never drive again. So I grew up walking and taking the bus and riding my bike, and that was just normal.
My name is Armando, and I don't drive because I never learned how to. I was born and raised in El Salvador, in Central America, and I guess I had a normal childhood. My mom, my dad, they both drive. My sister learned how to drive as well when she was really young. I'm the only one who didn't learn how to drive. But I never really felt that comfortable behind the wheel, and I was a little bit scared, I guess, of objects coming too close to me, the other cars coming too close to me. So I never really liked that.
Buick presents the Sleek Centurion.
I have 3 older brothers. We were all given model cars to build, and we also had what we call dinky toy car collections in those days too, and corgi toys. So I think I did collect cars, sort of, a little bit for a while.
Yes, I used to play a lot with those, Hot Wheels little cars, right? I would love to make them crash. I remember, some of my other friends, they would make little, races with their cars, and, or they would just, push them and they would go really far. I would always sort of, get stuck with, the crashing of the little cars. Yes, and maybe that's something that was in my subconscious, already, that thinking that cars, they would crash.
I don't want to give the impression, though, that I didn't like cars. I did like cars. My friends and I love to follow the fashions in car changes. The roof lines, the headlights, the taillights, all that sort of stuff. I wasn't able to articulate it at the time, but obviously I had a kind of design orientation to my liking of cars, sort of an aesthetic appeal.
I did take driver education in high school and even got my license when I was 18. But I never felt comfortable behind the wheel, and finally I just let my license lapse.
You know, kids who grew up with parents who drive them everywhere can't even conceive of taking the bus. Like that's just unimaginable. They start hitting 15 or 16 and it doesn't even occur to them to not think about taking driver's ed or whatever, because they've never known a world that wasn't navigated by a car.
I was in high school at the time of the campaign to get students to learn to be responsible drivers, essentially by scaring us to death. One of the things that they did was bring in driver education films.
2 men are dead because one of them was too smart to obey a speed limit warning.
You know, I still remember one of them vividly. That's how much of an impact it had on me, and I must have been 16 or 17 years old. And it was pretty graphic imagery of traffic accidents. So, you know, I don't doubt that that maybe had some effect on my thinking that this was something I didn't want to indulge in.
That first experience when you're in driver's ed and you think, like all your classmates, this is going to be fun. We're going to have so much fun. We're going to drive. We're going to go through Burger King drive-thru. It's going to be awesome. It wasn't awesome. It was the worst. I seem to be the only person that wasn't good at it. I have no spatial relations ability. So when I sat someone in the car for the first time, our instructor, I still remember him, Murray Tarvis, and we had our classmates in the car, and the first thing I did was graze a bus. First thing I did, Julia, it's your turn. Great! Sideswipe. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to estimate where I was in the lane. So I kept drifting out of the lane, which is why I kept having these things happen to me. Yeah, that was enough. I thought, I'm just not good at this, and I don't really want to risk dying to find out if I can get better. So I just decided to put that aside.
Ooh, what a dreamy ride.
My name is Megan Fresh, and I don't drive because I've never wanted to. It was while I was in driver's ed, I decided that I didn't actually want to drive because I drove maybe twice and I did not like the experience. I have a brother and a sister, and both of them had wrecked 3 cars between the two of them. And my parents weren't going to allow me to drive, even if I had a license. So I decided, why bother?
When I was 16, I did take driver's ed, and I was really excited to learn how to drive a car. I think I thought it would mean like freedom, it would mean like excitement. And then I passed my test with flying colors. I only got 5 demerits on my driver's test. And borrowed my mom's van a couple times and like drove just like through the suburbs as a teenager, like listening to angsty music, and that was okay. But it wasn't as enjoyable as putting on my headphones and going for a walk and listening to angsty music. So it didn't really stick, and I never made the choice. I could have bought a car, lots of times I could have bought a car, and I just never made that choice.
In El Salvador, it's very hard to get around if you don't have a car. Mostly because of the safety situation. I mean, it's not a country that is very safe. So people drive to get places because there's, a lot of crime. Things happen in the public transportation, the buses, is like people get killed. I took classes like 4 or 5 times because, my mom wanted me to learn how to drive. So like she would send me to like all these like driving schools and whatnot. And I remember like being, behind the wheel and going all of that, but all the time being just stressed, really stressed. It didn't give me peace. Like I just didn't like cars.
I don't know what other activities we engage in North American culture that have such omnipresent, immediate potential for immense destruction every moment that you're engaging in that activity. yet that we do so often and so thoughtlessly. And I think it's really interesting that if I say I don't drive because because it's dangerous, people assume that I have a phobia or have some sort of irrational fear. And I don't think I have an irrational fear at all. I think I have a really healthy sense of this is a really dangerous thing to do. It's this crazy kind of, cognitive dissonance that we seem to have in this culture where being afraid of flying is a pretty normal, thing that people accept. And yet if you say you're afraid of driving, people hear that very differently.
I want a Corvette.
I thought you would.
Ooh, I want a Pontiac too.
Okay, we'll have the usual two-car garage.
I saw this movie, Alien Visitor. I guess for some reason I borrowed it from Movie Village and watched it, and I liked it so much I actually ended up buying it, so I still have a copy. It's a story about a man who is camping in the Australian outback, and suddenly an alien lands from a far more progressive world, and she is horrified at how humans have been trashing the earth with pollution and traffic. So she teaches him about that, and he gradually begins to have his mind open to her ideas and convinced in the end that he has to go on a crusade against cars. And I tried to get other people to see the movie, and most of them were sort of turned off by it, but for me it was a pretty powerful tool for quite a while.
There's so many people driving from the exact same place to within a 2-block radius downtown every day in hundreds of different cars, which I think is really unfortunate when there's other group transport options like buses and car shares. It comes face to face with you when you're riding your bike and you have some exhaust spewing in your face or whatever. Having that negative experience, it's really crystal clear that driving has a negative impact on the greater environment, the earth we live on, but also on just the other people who are walking or biking around.
When I see it from a human rights angle and perspective, it's we have the right to have a healthy environment. I worked in Guatemala for a while, and I remember my eyes would just burn. You would feel it immediately because there's just so many cars, and it's just all the smoke from the buses and everything. And a lot of these buses that the public transportation that they're using in down there, they're buses that they're not used anymore in North America or Europe because it's not safe for them to use them here anymore. So they ship them down there, and they continue to use them. So that's horrible, what they're doing to the environment. And I mean, and that's going to have an impact as well here, because it's not like it's just going to stay there.
To live car-free requires us to change the way we think about and organize our lives.
My name is Beth McKechnie, and I choose to be multimodal. I would drive to work. This was 20 years ago plus, and yet I would be out in the evening and on the weekends cycling 100 kilometers a day or more. And it suddenly occurred to me that if I could do that on the weekend, that I could very easily bike to work. But what I was finding was that having a car in our driveway meant that many times that I intended to bike or bus, that it was just too convenient to say, oh, I'm running late, or it's raining, or it's too cold out, and I'd end up taking the car. So finally we came to the decision that we had to get rid of it in order to make it more reasonable that I had to bike or bus. And sure enough, I was able to do it once we got rid of the car.
For some people, choosing not to drive has led them to connect with a larger global movement, which is exploring alternatives to private cars.
I remember hearing about Car Free Day quite a few years ago. I guess maybe through reading. There's even a magazine called Car Busters, International Celebration of Anti-Car Culture stuff, and Car Free Day was talked about in there. So I have participated in group bike rides on that day. Probably about 6 or 8 years ago, I organized a car-free day, which was a bike ride together with a group of people from downtown out to Confusion Corner, where we met up with a marching band, Winnipeg's Flaming Trolleys, and the band was playing and everybody was milling around with their bikes and creating a ruckus.
The challenge that's created, though, is how do we now integrate bicycle paths, pedestrians, and transit easily into that network? And we're seeing some birthing pains of a much more, finally, aggressive approach to, well, we've got to serve cyclists. And certainly other cities have shown how easily you can fit that in. But it takes some give. You're going to have a bit more give on the roads for cyclists. It's just a question now, can we do it safely? And the big push, I think is very unfortunate in Winnipeg, is the speeds are gradually moving up. That is, to my mind, stupid, because the research shows that at 60 and above, the chances of surviving a collision with the difference of speed between a cyclist and a car are near zero.
I've ridden bicycle beside cars for so many years that I just know how scary and awful it feels and sounds to be in that roar of traffic, but people inside their cars maybe aren't hearing it because they're insulated. But it sounds like death.
I am your permit to drive an automobile. I am only a card in your wallet or purse, yet I unroll before your eyes a magic carpet, the millions of miles of highways and byways that crisscross the nation. I am your round-trip travel ticket, your passport to pleasure. I am the only commuter's ticket you need to drive to and from school or work, day after day, year after year.
Cars are so deeply embedded in our culture that we are now conditioned to them starting right at birth.
You cannot even take your baby home from the hospital unless you have a car seat.
Yes, that is a rule, that you have to have a car seat in order to leave the hospital.
Even if you are a non-driver who never plans to drive, even if you are walking your baby home, they will not let you take your infant out of the hospital unless you show them your safetied car seat.
In fact, my first child, my daughter, was born 5 weeks early, and so she was in the NICU, and she actually had to sit in the car seat for an hour, like with all these tubes hooked up to her before they would let her leave the hospital. Just having her sit in a car seat as a trial for letting her leave the hospital seems kind of absurd.
Such a car culture, such a car culture.
Many people find it hard to even imagine how anyone can live without a car.
I do get a lot of questions almost daily from other parents as to why I don't drive, or they're surprised that I don't drive. My children, I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old. Their school is just over a kilometer away from where we live, and we walk there. The younger one is half days, so we walk there and back, and then there and back. And so that's like almost 5 kilometers a day, and that's a lot of walking for them. They're really, really excellent walkers.
Yeah, it's interesting having a child and not having a car. I chose, when he was quite young, to use I want to call it a snuggly, but you know, a baby carrier. So taking the bus was not an issue, and walking was a lot easier. But now that he's almost 13, it's just normal. And it's amazing how far he'll walk now. He doesn't ask, well, how are we getting to wherever we're going? We're either walking or we're taking the bus, but we just go.
When I stopped driving and gave up my driver's license, I was at the point where I was involved with bicycle riding with my son. We were riding together to school a lot before he could ride on his own. And then as soon as he was able to, then he continued riding bike on his own to and from school.
I'm always amazed when people who live a 15-minute walk away will drive their kids over to our house. because they can't imagine sending their kid off to walk by themselves.
With the Active and Safe Routes to School program, we're trying to get more kids walking and biking to school again. It was only 2 or 3 generations ago that 85% of kids would walk or bike to school, and now nationally that average is about 35%. And that's coming at the same time that we're seeing the rising rates of physical inactivity and obesity in children and type 2 diabetes.
I've lived downtown since I got back from graduate school in 1981. I lived on Colony Street. Then I lived on Broadway at Donald Street. And it was around that time that I met Bev. And since then we've moved twice, and we've only moved a few blocks. I can walk to the university where I teach. It's close to the library, which is another favorite place that we like to go. We've been disappointed a little bit in the facilities for shopping downtown, but it's not so bad. We can walk to some places, over the bridge on the other side for groceries.
Doing groceries different. I called it more like the European style. You just go and shop for a day or two, and you're planning, like what am I going to make for supper? So the food you're buying is more fresh.
In the summertime, I have a bike trailer, and I apply my skills that I think I have acquired from years of playing Tetris, and I just fit everything in the bike trailer, and that's how I do that in the summertime. And currently, I carpool with a friend's husband. He drives me, and we go grocery shopping. So I do get in a car for that in the wintertime.
I absolutely never thought this winter, oh, I should get a car. I'm like really dress warm. I've got like several layers of long johns on. I do the whole bit. So I never have thought. I mean, cars almost seem more stressful than walking because you have to plug them in. You have to like protect your car. You have to you probably won't start anyways in this weather. So I've never actually thought, oh, I wish I had a car. It's so, so cold.
For a lot of urban dwellers, car culture has created a separation between where we live and where we work. Because I don't drive, I made a conscious choice to live within walking distance of where I work.
I think not driving has certainly influenced where I live in relation to where I work. I do disability support work. I work for a lady who lives in her own home, and I started working for her and I moved into her neighborhood because I just loved this neighborhood so much because everything's here. I mean, my work is here and grocery stores are close by and my friends live in this neighborhood too, so it's just made it easy to not have a car.
I've been in the same primary job for 19 years, and I have always chosen to live within a close walking distance. I have done other work over the years, including doing landscaping, which I just had to get creative with a bike and bike trailer to haul equipment. And in that aspect has certainly made that job a bit more of a challenge. But still, it was my preference to do it that way.
Because I'm a writer, I do a lot of sort of contract work or freelance work or different odd little projects. Sometimes I've been invited to teach or to speak in schools, which are not always on convenient bus routes. And sometimes that provokes some anxiety about how to get there. Certainly, there are some places that I have not gone and I will never go. There are some really beautiful writing retreat spaces that I can't go to because you need a car. And I remember talking to someone in the arts community who said, why don't you apply for one of the residencies at this place? And I said, well, I don't drive. And she looked at me, she said, what do you mean you don't drive? Well, learn how to drive. I said, well, make a residency where I don't have to bring a car, you know? That would be really beautiful.
I work in human rights, and I've always worked in human rights my whole life. And I work abroad in like different, countries, developing countries and things like that. So sometimes you have postings there that, like they look really interesting to me, like great job, opportunities and all of that, but they require you to have a driving license. So I can't take those jobs. I can't even apply for those jobs because I know, and because I grew up in a developing country where it's not safe, I know that it's not just because you need to get it replaced, but sometimes it's also because of safety. So it has affected some of the choices that I made.
I haven't owned a car for more than 10 years, so I've never had car payments in these last years, and I've, haven't had to buy gas or oil or anything. So I haven't had to work as much. I've had way more free time. I think people forget about that whole, they're working to support their car habit. It seems like enslavement to me.
I'm really lucky in that I've pursued and acquired work that is pretty close to where I live, which I really love. Sometimes for work, though, I have to go to another end of town or a little further, and I like to walk to that other place I have to go. So sometimes coworkers or clients have sort of scoffed at how far I've walked to get to a certain meeting or a certain event. Sometimes it means a really long walk, walking across the train tracks to another area of town can be a pretty long walk in the winter, but I actually think of it as a really nice treat when for work I get to go to this other neighborhood and get to walk to it and experience what that neighborhood is like.
Although not driving looks like it limits our possibilities, it actually opens up a space to build deeper connections with nature and community.
I grew up in a single-parent family. My dad died when I was a year old, and we lived in Riverview. And my brother, my mom and I didn't have a car until I was either 15 or 16. So the whole time was spent basically as a pedestrian or as a cyclist. And it's where I really started to think about the success of good, sustainable or quality communities. We had, within walking distance, 2 grocery stores, a small tomboy, the big Safeway, we had butchers, we had pharmacists, hardware stores. And because we had 2 small kids, we went everywhere, because as a single parent, you can't leave the kids behind. So in the winter, it was on a toboggan, and my mom was just amazing. She made every trip fun, spinning donuts in the street, and in the summer, it was pushing a wagon with my brother and I in it to go shopping. So really, it shaped the way that I thought about community and the evolution of Winnipeg and the real quality of our sort of inner neighborhoods. Each one of those had all the services within easy walking distance. So, had we lived in a different community, as a single parent, I don't know what we could have done. And my fear now is that for those that can't drive, let alone those that choose not to drive, is we've isolated our communities to where there's many places in Winnipeg that are zoned so monolithically that you can't walk to get food. And you can't walk to even get easy public transport, and you're very isolated. You're at the end of the runs.
It would be really lovely if we valued having the kinds of neighborhoods that people enjoy walking around in. I enjoy walking around in this Wolseley West Broadway neighborhood. I like neighborhoods where people live and people shop, and I hope that those kinds of neighborhoods and that way of living and moving through the world is valued, and not just sort of theoretically valued, but valued in really tangible, practical ways through city planning and through, requiring neighborhoods to be conducive to mixed use.
And in the newer subdivisions, many streets don't even have sidewalks, and there isn't really a provision for sidewalks. Once it's developed, getting the connective tissue of mass transit or bicycle paths or pedestrian paths is almost impossible. Even if you build the Sage Creeks, Waverly West, there's no reason why you couldn't build an Osborne Village or Corden Avenue in the center of it as a street that is functioning as a human space, that human scale of the person and the body feels comfortable in. I think that's our challenge.
I think that I interact more with my community as a non-driver because I'm in it, like physically in it, and I walk past people and I see them on the street and we interact, and sometimes I'll just randomly run into people that I would never have run into had I been in a vehicle.
I'm really lucky too because my family also lives really close to me, so my relationship with my family is definitely better because they live within walking distance of my house. I don't know if I'd see them as much if they didn't. So it lends to that sense of community too, because I'll be walking down the street with no intention of necessarily running into a friend, but I'll run into a friend and we'll stop and have tea or whatever.
My partner and I have an expression about going anywhere in Wolseley, and we call going somewhere in Wolseley going out for a Wolseley minute. Because we always intend on only going to whatever our destination is, whether it's picking something up at the bakery, for example, but inevitably we'll run into several people we know and stop and talk. And so it always turns into a much longer trip than we had anticipated. But that's all part of being part of community and sustaining the community that you have around you. And so it's kind of a running joke, the Wolseley Minute. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
As a non-driver, my connection to Winnipeg, I think it's more related to towards the people. It's just like repeating what I grew up in. I know my neighbors. I know people who are in the shops that I go to. It's a choice that I make, that I choose to live here downtown where, I don't need a car.
Let's go all out and buy a Cadillac too.
I can hardly wait for this dream to come true.
And I like not being able to direct and to choose exactly what community is going to look like to me and for me all the time, because it feels more authentic, it feels more real, I don't think people who drive realize how much they don't interact with the world. I think so often when you drive, you get up in the morning and you get into your car bubble and you drive to work. You get out of your car and you engage in your work bubble. And at the end of the day, you get back in your car bubble and you drive home to your home bubble, and you only have to interact with people whom you choose to interact with. But other than that, you never have to interact in a public realm. But when you don't drive, you interact in that public site all the time. You interact with other people walking, you interact with, little kids running around on the sidewalk, and you interact with the creatures that, the squirrels and the birds and the stray dogs and the and all of that kind of stuff. Or I'm on the bus where, you don't get to choose who you're going to interact with or how.
When you're at the bus stop, I have my bus friends, that I talk to. I don't know the name of everyone, but there's people that, I say hi and, we chit-chat. It's like we look after each other, like if the bus is coming and you see that person running for the bus, you let the bus driver know, and it's the human touch. You just start to know too, the bus drivers, and some of them are nice and others are pretty miserable.
You sit beside people and you listen to other people's conversations, whether you want to or not. And, sometimes people are in trouble and sometimes people are in crisis and sometimes people are having, a riotous time. And you don't get to predict and choose what kind of community or what kind of world you're going to interact with. You enter into it and roll with it and learn how to be part of that great sort of public mass.
I remember having little experiments with myself where I'd walk home from work and smile at everyone I passed and then count how many folks smiled back or said hello to me. For the record, most people smiled back or said hello. And that might not have happened otherwise had I not taken the step to smile and engage that stranger. I guess I feel like I contribute a sense that there is another way other than riding cars all the time. That anyone can just walk or ride their bike to the places they need to go, and that there's actually a possibility, especially within a small geographic area, of becoming something like car-free. I'm not like a typical really athletic young person on a bike. I've got my old cruiser that can take my weight and get to be a fat girl out riding my bike, which is really awesome. And I think that gets to show people that it's not like an elite activity that only really fit and small people can do. I like to be a fat girl riding my bike.
In addition to walking, cycling, and using public transportation, many people are also exploring new ways of thinking about cars and alternatives to driving.
I started getting contracts to do workplace programs that would evaluate how employees currently got around or got to and from work, and what policies and programs and infrastructure could be put in at a workplace to encourage and support employees to choose green modes more often. We would hear from people who would say, I would like to live car-free, but I find it really hard because the transit system isn't quite robust enough. And so what would happen is that these people would end up feeling like they were forced into buying a car, which horrified me that they were stuck in that position. So out of that came the Peg City Car Co-op, which we launched in 2011. And our tagline for the Car Co-op is bike, walk, bus, and sometimes drive. So we're the sometimes drive portion of the equation there.
I think people are surprised and weirded out by hitchhikers in the city for some reason. I don't know why that is, so I think it's sort of my mission to try and keep it in their face. That they should be aware that it's okay to pick up a stranger, but they don't usually. But if the weather is crazy, like if it's really blowing snow or something, or in the middle of the woods, then people are more inclined to stop. I think it was right around New Year's this winter that I was out there hitchhiking because I needed to go to an event down on Albert Street, and a fellow in a big SUV picked me up, and he was going right into that neighborhood, so it was actually a perfect situation. We had a good chat about it. I don't know exactly why he picked me up that day, but maybe it was the weather.
Choosing to live a car-free life not only impacts the world around us, it also affects the way we experience ourselves in the world.
For me, I think that not driving forces me to interact with the world in ways that I don't control. And part of what that means is that because I have relinquished control over over these parts of my passages through the world, my journeys through the world, it opens up this space where the world can interact with me, and where God or the numinous or whatever can come into my life or my consciousness or my being on its own schedule and according to its own sense of what needs to happen.
I think any sort of spiritual feeling I get from walking as opposed to driving is more in the vein of mindfulness, of feeling my feet padding along the sidewalk. I think for me is sort of a spiritual and mindful thing, and an experience I wouldn't get if I was driving. Being mindful of my steps on the pavement and the wind on my face is a really important part of being mindful to me, and that really contributes to my ability to feel in the moment and present in my life.
To me, there's no better way to clear my head or to reach that sort of creative space that's within me than walking. I can be in the worst possible mood when I leave home, but when I get to wherever I'm going, I always feel better. And Is that spiritual? I'm not sure, but it's a place that I don't feel that I would necessarily get to if I were a car driver.
You're closer to nature. You're closer to the seasons too, because you have to dress appropriately. You know, you feel the cold, you feel the heat. You see like how the seasons change. You see the light in the morning is different. You're more in tune with what's going on around you.
When you move in those slower kinds of ways, when you're not just rushing in your car, you have time to, you know, stand around and wait for a bus and you know, watch the pattern of light through the leaves, or watch the squirrels, you know, more than just notice a squirrel over the corner of your eye, but really watch what they're doing and how they're arguing with each other and what they're gathering and where they're going and the ways that they move. You're forced to engage in a more meditative sense of time and space and self. And you understand yourself to be more of an organic part of the things that are moving around you. Sometimes you experience yourself quite strongly as the thing that's intruding, you know? You get a sense that this really is a world of trees and squirrels and birds and insects, and you are this big thing that's in the way. And I think that's an important spiritual moment too, to realize where you don't belong and how you're going to move with that. I was walking home from somewhere once, and I was walking and reading, and something fell on my head so hard that it knocked the sunglasses right off my face because it was summer. And I was really startled and also really mad. And I looked around because I thought someone had thrown something at me. It was really quite intense. And I looked, and it was a big tree branch that had fallen out of the tree for no discernible reason onto my head. And I was so mad. And I picked it up and I marched home with it. And I called my friend and I said, Kirsten, this stupid tree branch fell on my head while I was walking home. What is that? And, you know, it prompted this conversation between the two of us about, you know, what the branch looked like and the shape of it and why it fell on my head and what was going on and what I've been thinking about, and then, you know, into bigger questions of some of the things I maybe needed to think about in my life at that point in time, and what felt the need to sort of shake me up and knock me out of a particular kind of complacency about something. And that wouldn't have happened in the same way if I were in a car, or if I were in a car, you know, it would have been an accident. It would have been, you know, dangerous and calamitous. It's very rarely dangerous for me to be walking around or taking the bus.
These Winnipeggers, like many other people around the world who have made the choice to become car-free, are changing the way society thinks about and designs our communities.
And last of all, designed for the electronic highway of the future, the fabulous turbine-powered Firebird 2.
Firebird 2 to Control Tower. We are about to take off on the highway of tomorrow.
I think we have a great opportunity in Winnipeg because we have very wide streets in many cases when you look at some of our major streets. So I'd like to see a reallocation of that space to see an equal priority being given to all modes. It's a concept called complete streets, where regardless of the type of mode that you're using, that you have safe, convenient, and comfortable access to transportation. So whether you're walking, whether you're riding the bus, whether you're on a bike, whether you're in a taxi or a car, you would have space allocated to you. And that's not to say that we have huge roadways. It means that right now where we have 6 lanes for cars, that 1 or 2 of those would be converted for use for other modes. It's just a matter of how quickly we get there, where it will be a function of recognizing that people are looking for different ways of getting around and making sure that we can answer all of those and safely.
If I were a city planner, some of the things I would push for would be getting rid of one-way streets. I think that one-way streets contribute to speed hugely. Secondly, I would love to see street crossings made more safe for pedestrians. I'd like to give people who are walking, people who are on foot, the best possible world in the city. I'd like to see people realize it's better off to just give up driving in the city and take other methods of transportation.
You know, there's many architectural ways of creating great livable spaces in our urban streets, but you got to make it a priority. Along with that, what we need to do is create great gathering spaces along the route, like you know, beads on a chain. And if you look at most of the great cities that have great street life, the New Yorks, the Londons, Amsterdam, Paris, it's not just great sidewalks. It's along those great sidewalks there are great spaces. I guess we call it the art of living in an urban center.
I wish people who are really committed drivers would spend some non-driving time to be able to experience this city the way that I experience it. You know, I think people don't even realize sometimes what they're missing. And not be afraid of it. You know, I think it's interesting. People become very judgmental of people who don't want to drive because they think it's dangerous. But many, many people say they drive because it's too dangerous to not drive. You know, I won't go downtown at night. It's too dangerous. I won't take public transportation. It's too dangerous. It's really okay. Like, it's really okay. I promise you, it is really, really okay.
Together we'll make the world new.
What I would like people to understand about my choice not to drive. It's a human right, and it should be respected, just as the way I respect people who choose to drive. Drivers look at people who walk and people who ride their bike, you know, as, you know, like kind of losers. And I think it's totally the opposite, that people who don't have a car are free. They don't have the burden of driving, and, you know, like, we deserve a bit more respect.
Down in California where they never have a rusty day, they tint the windows and keep them all closed 'cause they need the cars cool for the movies. Where did you get your shoes? Haven't you heard the news? Hey, running girl, do you know I could be your accessory? Make me your shiny toy. Up in Motor City where the motor runs everything, it's a money machine and it drives like a dream, singing chang-a-lang and shoo-bed-doo-bed.